Hello, I'm Joe Dillette, owner of the carving shop, and this is the second part of the series of sharpening videos. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at the first video, the basics and the sharpening a knife. If you haven't, I would suggest you go and view that prior to viewing this section here. In this section, what we are going to talk about is sharpening the chisels. And specifically, we're looking at sharpening a wood carving gouge and a carpenter's chisel. But before we get into that, one thing I want to mention is that when you're traveling with your knife, carving tools, to keep a little set of sharpening equipment along, this is a little diamond stone that I picked up at a checkout counter at the hardware store. I think the stone, this is for sharpening fish hooks. There's a groove down the center. But the whole surface is diamond, and it's quite aggressive, and it works quite well for sharpening carving tools too. So if you're looking for a little traveler set, this stone is fairly aggressive, so it'll remove some stock. If you got a little nick in the tool, you'll have to work a little while to get a nick out. But it's like the fine stone that you're working with. And this one comes in a little leather pouch to carry. And the only other thing you need besides that, this is a little piece of basswood that I made, and this is what I rub the buffing compound. So I have a little piece of buffing compound that I rub on here, and that's the strop that I use. And so these two things, if I get a knife that I need to get a little touch up on, or a carving tool that is getting a little dull, this is what I need to if I'm traveling. So it's nice, small, fits in your luggage, and it's not very expensive. Okay, let's talk about sharpening tools, and let's begin with talking about angles. The angle that you put on the tool is pretty important. If you had a carving tool that was shaped a wedge like this, it would be very difficult to push through the wood because you would get a lot of drag to it. As soon as the tip would go in, it widens out, and any tool is like pushing a wedge through the wood or through whatever you're trying to cut. So the more you can reduce that angle down, the less drag that you have, and the easier it's going to be to push it through whatever material that you're trying to cut. And so the trade-off, if you got a wide angle like this, let's say a 45-degree angle, you've got a very strong cutting edge. But as you start reducing that angle, that cutting edge begins to get weaker and weaker. So we were talking yesterday on video one. I made the video yesterday, but we were talking about this knife, and the angle that we put it at was we placed a dime under the back side of this knife, and that brought the cutting edge right in contact with the stone. That is about a 10-degree angle is what that translates to. If you were to take this knife and hit it with a mallet on the back side to drive it into the wood, you probably would chip the cutting edge, because that angle is at 10 degrees and it's fairly weak. So on the chisels, we need to widen that out a little bit, increase the angle. And so let's look at the angles. The block plane that you get is at a 45-degree angle. This is the regular plane that you're planing along the grain, and the nice curls coming up in the block plane. That is a 45-degree angle. What that does is, if you were to take that and do the end grain of a piece of wood, like this here, that angle is so steep that it would crush the end grain. It would have too much drag. It would take too much pressure to push it through, and it would break down that end grain. So an end grain plane like this here is at 22.5 degrees. It's half of the angle of the regular block plane. So this is an end grain plane. That now if you take that 22.5 degrees, this is the blade here, this is the shoe here. And as you come across, it will not, if it's sharp, it will not break the end grain. It will not mush it over. It has a better chance of cutting it because you've reduced that angle from 45 degrees down to 22 degrees. So what angle do we use for our chisels? Well, we use basically, our chisels are cutting end grain, just like the end grain plane, and we should be using about a 22 degree angle. So if you were to buy, let's say, Swiss tools, they normally come pre-sharpened at about 19 degrees. Most of those tools are cutting basswood, and so they lower that angle down, so it'll cut basswood. This is a piece of basswood here. We'll talk a little bit more about angle, but let's first of all talk about the basswood. The softer the wood, the sharper the tool has to be. So you can equate that to, let's say in the kitchen, you want to cut a fresh loaf of bread or a tomato. You want the sharpest knife that you've got in the kitchen, so you don't mush down the loaf of bread or mush down the tomato. If you're cutting a carrot, you can grab about any knife and just chop it. It's the same with the wood. If you're got a soft wood, it's like that soft loaf of bread. You need the sharpest tool, so when you're cutting it, it's not going to break and push because there's no stability to hold it back. If you're cutting a hard piece of wood, like black walnut or even harder, than like hard maple, you can get by with a duller tool because you have the stability like the carrot. It'll chop it, it'll cut it without smashing it up for you. So when we're testing the sharpness of a tool, we're testing it with basswood or butternut or another soft wood like aspen or something like that, and we cut across grain, and then we inspect the cut to make sure that there is no marks left from chips in the cutting edge, or that it's not smashing the wood. So you cut across grain on basswood is how you test your tools. Okay, so if we're going to be cutting, when you're carving, you're almost always cutting end grain. You're exposing end grain. So as you're carving an image in a piece of wood or the carpenter's chisel, you're coming down, you're setting a hinge or something like that, you are cutting end grain. So it should be about the same angle as this end grain plane at 22.5 degrees. So if you were to take a piece of paper, that's a 90-degree angle. You fold that paper in half like this here, you got a 45-degree angle. That would be like the block plane here, the 45-degree angle. And then the end grain plane is you fold it in half again, so you're bisecting that angle again, and that is the 22.5 degrees. So how do you check the angle that your tool is sharpened at? Well, what you do is you start with the tool laying down, and you just keep moving it across, and when it starts cutting in, like right now it's starting to grab, that is the angle that it's sharpened at. So, and that's the angle that you're going to carve it at. Every tool is like a plane. The heel of the plane or the shoe is the bevel that you have on the back. And you control the depth, so you're riding on the bevel on the back, and you're, if you want to go deeper, you raise the handle. If you want to come out of your cut, you lower the handle. So you're using the bevel on the back of the tool like a fulcrum of the lever where you're controlling your depth. So all the time you're going to be writing on that bevel on the back. So when you're sharpening, let's get the sharpening stone here in front. What angle do you hold this at? Well, you hold it at that 22 degrees. Or if you like the Swiss, you want to lower it at to about 19 degrees. So you start out with a reference like a piece of paper like this. You lay that tool on if you're not sure about the angle, and then you say, well, I want a 19 degrees, then you lower it just a little bit below the edge of that paper at about 19 degrees. And then that's the angle that you're going to be sharpening at. The sharpening technique is exactly the same steps that we've been using with the knife. You're going to start, if the tool is very dull, needs stock to be removed, let's say you have a nick in it. If there's a nick, you have to remove a lot of stock to get to the bottom of that nick. Then you would start with a coarse stone. And then you would go to the fine stone to reduce that size of the nick. Again, you are keeping an eye on the burr. So once you create the burr across the whole edge, the same as the knife, that as sharp as that stone is going to get it, then you move to the finer stone and then to the leather strap. So that is the theory behind the angle. Now, the shape of the end of the tool is unique to every carver. The angle is unique to every carver. Most of my tools that I sharpen are up at a higher angle, about a 29 degree. I carve a lot of harder woods like the walnut and cherry and maples and oak. So I like a little steeper angle, a little stronger edge on it. And most of the time I'm using a mallet. So if I'm using a mallet on the tool, then that is easier to make the cut. The mallet is the power. If you're going to be pushing it through by hand, then a lower angle where you have less drag and you don't need as strong of an edge. So then you can go down to maybe the 19 degree angle. Okay, so see how nice that's cutting. So anyway, when you read the books, they'll talk about the bevel being straight on the back, straight bevel. Let's do a little diagram on the marker board here to show you. So let's say here's the top of your tool, here's the wood, here's your cutting edge right here, and this is the bevel. And then you're going back up to the tool here. So they talk about it being a straight bevel on here. It's not necessary to have a straight bevel on there. It will work also if you're coming down with the tool and you've got a curved bevel. It's whatever the angle is right here at that cutting edge. That's the angle that you're going to be planing at. I sometimes, most of the time, I prefer a rounded bevel, because what that does is that moves the fulcrum of the lever closer to the cutting edge, where if you have a straight bevel, the fulcrum of the lever is back here, away from the cutting edge that far, and a rounded bevel brings it up closer. I seem to get a little bit more control over that. I can make more movement on my handle with and less movement on the tip. So here, a little movement, if you've got a straight bevel, a small movement here moves that tip more because the fulcrum is back further. The other thing that you'll read in books and they'll say is the proper way to do it, excuse me, is the corners. The corners, they say, is supposed to be sharp corners. And you look at most of the tools that the carvers are using, and most of them have slightly rounded corners. Excuse me. And this is because they're carving or they're sharpening with a leather strop. And remember from video 1, when we were sharpening the knife, we were talking about the pillow action of the strop, and that the tip of the knife was going to be rolled over because it sinks down into that pillow and it'll round that tip off. Well, it does the same with the corners of the, right here at the tips of the wings coming up. Also, the bevel. You can start off and grind a straight bevel on there, but if you're using leather and to buff the tool, remember that's a soft surface. And what that's going to do is eventually it's going to round that bevel. So if you're insistent on using a straight bevel and you're using a soft leather strop, then it'll always be rounding it and you'll always be straightening that bevel out. So I got used to just using it with the rounded bevel. I like it better than a straight bevel on the tool, and that's what seems to work best for me. Now the other thing about a carving tool is the inside edge is the cutting edge. So different than a knife, when we see the knife we sharpened it from both sides. And so the knife blade comes up both sides like that. And the carving tool has got a straight side and it's got the bevel side, the bevel on one side. So the inside edge typically is the cutting edge. So you're doing all your grinding and stock removing from the outside, you're doing your stropping from the outside, and then you finish up. What I do is I just bend the leather and I just get into the inside and finish that little bitty stropping out. If you've got a burr that's hanging in the inside and that burr is won't break off with just the leather, so you're scratching the leather because that burr is there, then you can just take a piece of metal, it won't dull the tool down, lay it flat on that surface. Don't go across the edge like that, that will dull it. But lay it flat on the surface and just break that burr off. And then you can continue on with your stropping. That won't dull it down any. So the same with the carpenter's chisel. The bevel comes from one side. Now, the carpenter's chisel is a little bit different than a carving tool. Insofar as a carving tool, when you're taking the inside and you're stropping it like this, remember the leather is a soft material and it's going to roll the edge. So you are going to be creating a very slight bevel in the inside of that tool. And that's good because a carving tool, as you'll see in a later video, is made to be used in 3 directions. It's made to be used right side up like this, with the curve like so, going across like that. It's also made to be doing plunge cuts like this, and it's made to be used upside down. Upside down, like if you're doing grapes, or rounding a surface off. And in order to do that, you need a little bit of a bevel so you can control it to bring it up out of the cut. And that's what that leather does. It just gives you that little micro bevel on there. However, with the carving chisel, or the carpenter's chisel, you cannot have any bevel there. That cutting edge has to be that flat surface. It can't be in anymore. That is the reason for that is the carpenter's chisel is made to cut in a downward direction and not drift away from that edge. If you had a little micro bevel, that micro bevel takes the tool path and keeps moving it away from the edge that you're trying to straighten out coming down. So if you had a micro bevel on a carpenter's chisel, then you would have to tip that out in order for it to go straight down, because the tool path is moved away from the flat surface. So how to strop a carpenter's chisel, on the back side, you cannot use a leather. You have to use, remember I said in the first video about the basswood, it's a hard surface, and yet we've used the same compound that we've used on the leather on the basswood. It's a hard surface and it's not like a pillow. So what you do is you lay the chisel flat onto a hard surface like a piece of basswood, and you strop it that way, the whole surface. That will buff the whole surface, including taking the burr off the edge. Now the other side of the chisel, the carpenter's chisel, should have a straight bevel on it, and so you should use a hard strop for that too, like a piece of basswood for the bevel side. So we've found out that the carving chisel is a plane, and the plane, you have the bevel is riding on the wood, and that is controlling your depth. So you can pull it, lower it, and that'll bring it out of the cut. You can go higher, and that goes deeper into the board. So what you're doing on the stone is you're sharpening at that same angle. So the angle would be you're raising it up to the 19 degree, 22.5 degree is what this here is at. The angle that you're comfortable with carving, and right at that angle. And now you say, okay, that's the angle that I like to use, and from that point then you start the sharpening process. So if it's very dull, you're going to go to the rough stone. You're going to put the oil on. Remember, the oil we talked about was the mineral oil. This stone is saturated with it. I'm not going to scrub and dull this tool down. This tool is pretty sharp. And but you use the same technique and same steps that you used in the knife off the first video. I suggest after viewing that video, you take a knife and you practice until you can get that razor sharp edge, and then try it on the gouge. Now the difference between the knife and the gouge, remember the knife we had to raise the hand up. We locked our wrist to get the angle. Here we're going to lock our wrist also to get the angle. And I'm pressing about the same amount of pressure that I was with the knife, about 5 pounds of pressure down on the stone, and I'm going in that same circular motion that I was using for the knife. But you see the difference is I'm locking the wrist in this way, but I'm rolling my wrist in this direction so I get that curve. So I'm rocking it back and forth so I go from wing to wing. And then, after that, then I do the stropping. So remember with the knife, when we were doing the strop, we always pulled away from the cutting edge. And in doing so, we raised this back just so it was clearing and coming across. But we were making sure that this cutting edge was coming in contact with the leather. Actually, most of the pressure, and this is still about 5 pounds of pressure I'm using, is not at the cutting edge. It's away from the cutting edge, and that leather is springing back, just touching that cutting edge and buffing that. When we're doing the carving tool, it's the same. So what I would suggest, because if you're using a leather, it's no longer that 22.5 degree or 19 degree, whatever your preference is. You're going to push that tool down with the pressure you're going to use, and then you're going to raise the handle up until the gap closes. When you close the gap against the leather, then you start stropping at that angle. So what's going to happen is this part furthest away from the cutting edge, that fulcrum of the leather, is where most of that 5 pounds pressure is. And then the pressure of the leather is releasing as it gets out to the end of the cutting edge. So you're doing most of the buffing way back away from the cutting edge, and but that's what you have to do. If you put equal pressure across that surface and you coming across, so you're raised at that 22.5 degrees, that leather is springing up. And what that does is that takes the edge off. And pretty soon, you might get the edge sharp, but what's going to happen is your angle keeps raising and raising until pretty soon you're pushing down in this direction to go that direction. Most of your force is this way. So then you'll have to go on the stone and spend quite a bit of time lowering that angle down to where you're back at that 22 degrees. So what I recommend you do is to take your stone strop and a carving tool, a carpenter's chisel, and sharpen those till you get that razor sharp edge. The third video that I'm going to do, the next one in this series, is sharpening a V-tool. The V-tool is the most difficult one. So practice these first steps, be able to get the razor sharp edge on the knife, be able to get the razor sharp edge on the carving tool and on a carpenter's chisel, and then you're ready to learn how to sharpen the V-tool. Thank you.